Hey guys, welcome to TGS Outdoors. Today we are going to be talking about the history of the shotgun, or more importantly, the technological milestones that got us to where we are today. It would be wrong not to start at the very beginning, and the very beginning is the blunderbuss. So the name blunderbuss actually originates from the Dutch Donderbus, which means thunder stick, which kind of sums it up. You know, we all know that trumpety ball looking thing. This wasn't the fact that this is the first shotgun. Shot had obviously, since guns have been around since the 13th century, been put in one of these to throw shot out. But this is the first time that it was used with this, usually not just conical end, but fully tapered bore to truly spread that shot as much as humanly could be done. Hence, the first shotgun. Interesting fact before we move on off of these fairly rudimentary and basic things is the fact that the short blunderbusses are called dragons. And that denotes the soldier's type dragoon. It was actually named after the dragon short version of the blunderbuss. I thought that was fascinating. Anyway, let's get through history. So we're going to have to skip forward a few hundred years. Blunderbusses were around in the 1600s and continued for a long time. And all guns at that time were powered by flintlocks. Flintlock shotguns did obviously exist, and the idea of putting two straight pipes together to throw shot at birds existed as well. But the first true milestone, if we like, is Mr. Forsyth and his self-priming style gun. Alright, maybe not this gun in particular because it's actually quite a small thing, but the fact that this guy, Forsyth, came up with the concept or developed the concept of using fulminate of mercury as an ignition system. So this was like the first non-flint ignition that actually took off. Forsyth's scent bottle locks and self-priming system kind of caught on. Other people stole his ideas. Joe Manton came up with a tube lock based on the same thing, and they had a legal battle. He had a legal battle with a lot of people. In fact, he tried to get the government to use his technology, and they said no. It just proved a little bit too dangerous, and they stuck with flintlocks for a very long time. More important than any of this is that this fulminate of mercury technology actually ended up being the percussion cap. And Forsyth did not invent it, although he kind of says he did, as many people say they did, which is quite cool. And that percussion cap pretty much drove technology forevermore, and we kind of still use a derivative of that same style today. Hence, Forsyth's in there. He had a London gun-making workshop, he was a Scot, he hired J. Purdy to make guns for him. Some of his guns are exquisitely made with his name, that bear his name at least. And hence, his self-priming gun is a milestone, an absolute milestone. Even though the percussion cap should be, I'm going to attribute it to him because he put in all the groundwork there, and without him, we wouldn't be where we are today. Next up, we're going to be in 1836, and we're looking at a Le Faucheux pinfires. This was the first guy, French guy, to have a hinge-breaking shotgun. That in itself, back then, was quite exciting. There had been other styles of gun, a lot of other styles of gun, but his was the first hinge breaker. There's loads of other pinfire shotguns out there, and this first hinge break was a pinfire. The Le Faucheux patent, we looked at Holtz, it has a rotary underlever at the front. It's fairly unexciting by all accounts, by modern standards, but they're beautifully put together, and it is the first hinge breaking system, and seeing as the hinge breaking system has become the norm, Le Faucheux needs to be mentioned. 1836, date for your diary. It would be wrong to move off of Le Faucheux without mentioning that he made this double side gated over and under shotgun that took the pinfire cartridge as well. That's pretty amazing, but it didn't take off, which is a shame. Imagine that. That would be quite cool if that was the norm. But it's not, because it's significantly harder, isn't it? Anyway, let's move on. The first centerfire break-open shotgun. The George Door breech-loading centerfire shotgun was patented in 1860 and was made for some years thereafter. George Door is a well-underrated maker, and his system, although not common, it's not really the same as we're using now, was the major bridging step between pinfire, which is driven from the top, and a centerfire, which is driven from the back. A very clever system that he used. It didn't really catch on, but obviously did. It was this amazing stepping stone. In fact, if we take a step back even further, Le Faucheux deserves a pat on the back as well for kind of saying, we're going to put everything in a paper tube cartridge. And, you know, that was a huge step in the right direction, if you like. Before that, well, yeah, we were shoving it in the front, weren't we? But we weren't. But to put all that shot in a paper tube with the ignition system built in was quite a big step, and Le Faucheux was a big part of that. So we'll take a step back before we take a step forward. We're going to glance over some things now, that being the 1863 Purdy underbolt. That was quite an important invention. a new locking system that is still used today on just about every side-by-side out there, and derivatives thereof are put into many over and unders. We're also going to skip over 1866 choking. That was a mixture between Pape and Greener arguing about who actually made choking. We can argue all the way back to a blunderbuss was technically a different choke to a straight tube, but they invented choke as we know it today. I mean, where would we be without choke? That's probably the biggest thing. Where would we be without choke? And we would still be shooting the same birds and we working with load development rather than barrel mixture with load. A great invention and a great change, and then from 1866 it's divulged into everything we know and love today, which is, again, pretty cool. 1874, the self-acting Needham Ejector came out. Where would we be without ejectors? Shooting slower is probably the answer there, but the Needham self-acting ejector of 1874 was one of the first ejector systems out there, in fact the first ejector system out there, and from there everyone made their own styles, and there is thousands of different types of ejector system out there. This is all in the land of side-by-sides that have pretty much fueled what we have today in one way or another. All vague derivatives of, I mean, the concept of ejecting the cartridges. Imagine if we didn't eject cartridges. That would be crazy, wouldn't it, from a double barrel gun. Anyway, moving 1 year on to 1875, and a huge thing was invented, the Antonine Db Box Lock. And this deserves a bit more time than the others. An Antonine Db Box Lock was the first simplified action. The first simplified action. It could actually be made with larger parts, was stronger and more robust than its side lock friends, and eventually allowed the average man to be able to afford good, strong guns. Before that, that just was not the case. The Antonine Db Box Lock was revolutionary, and let's say was the first point of accessibility for the average man, not to just have to go and buy something old, but who could buy something new and budget. And if you look at every budget side-by-side since, it's pretty much built on an A&D action. You look at every double rifle since of working quality, and it's built on an A&D action. What can I say? Solid as a rock, brilliant concept, loads of over and unders have kind of stolen various ideas from it. It was a huge step in the right direction. Before that, everything was more or less side lock. Awesome, great, huge stepping stone, and definitely worthy of mention in milestones to where we are today in the history of shotguns. The first ever commercially produced pump action shotgun was the Spencer Roper 1882 model slide action shotgun. Pretty amazing gun actually, tiny little slide on front, funny trigger, you have to push, there's two triggers in it, so you have to push the front one to get the slide to go, and instead of loading through the bottom, which is what we all kind of know is the intelligent option today, it loaded down through the top of the action. Needless to say, a very intelligent design, and the first short-term, I would say commercially available, not successful because we'll move on to that, shotgun. They went bust not that many years later, I think 1889, and they were bought out by a guy called Bannerman. Bannerman produced the same exact gun under his name in 10 bore and 12 bore as it had been already. However, he got into a bit of a pickle because Winchester came up with a better idea that was invented by the Browning guys, who were some of the best and still are, have been one of the best, were of all time some of the best gun makers and designers of all time, and they came out with the Winchester Model 1893 pump action, which is the first commercially available successful gun. And I'll go into this a bit further. I didn't think it really needed a spot, but I think it deserved a spot over the Spencer Roper. And this is because of the following. Firstly, not many 1893 pumps were actually made, about 34,000. They were soon replaced by the 1897, but they're kind of exactly the same-ish, in that the 97 is just a beefed up version of the 93. The 93 was not strong enough for nitro and smokeless powders that came out about, 1895, and as such had to be strengthened. It didn't stand up to it. But the 1893, because it ran on black, was actually interestingly available with a Damascus barrel. It was also available in various grades of wood, various specs, various engravings, and that went into 1897. This gun was so successful it was actually used in both World Wars and continued to be used for a very long time in that design, and inspired many other pumps thereafter. It was like, this is the father of the modern pump action. The Spencer Roper was certainly important, but not as important as the 1893-97. It was, it was a trench broom. These were amazing guns. This definitely deserves more of a shout than the Spencer Roper, which was more of a flop than this was. But an important milestone potentially, and maybe we should have given the others more credit to the guys who took those ideas and ran with them, but we're not gonna. We're just gonna give it to Winchester. We need to take a quick step back and mention the 1887 lever action shotgun, but that doesn't deserve too much time because it never really took off globally commercially because the other designs were better. Cue lever action shotgun people commenting, they're the best thing in the world. Doesn't matter, they may be. Next up is another Browning invention. It's amazing how Browning was so influential in the world of shotguns. He came out with the Auto 5, the Humpback, probably the most iconic and probably the most influential and best semi-automatic shotgun of all time. There you go, I said it. Designed in 1898 and made from 1902 all the way through to 1998 with a odd reincarnation that doesn't really honour, which honours the original but doesn't emulate it in pretty much any way in 2014. The Auto 5 is one of the longest running commercial shotguns of all time. It was hugely successful. It was made in many, many calibers. It was used in just about every world war and every war. It was favoured by many for its close-range combat capabilities, its firepower, its speed and its reliability, no more so than jungle troops. They're an odd thing, Auto 5s. They feel funny to shoot, but they are, once you get used to them, great. Absolutely great. They've been made in 3 countries over the course of their life: Belgium, Japan and America. This is a true global gun and a huge commercial success. Have they been outdone nowadays? Yeah, they probably have been replaced by something else, but it took a very long time for anybody else to even take a small spot of that spotlight. It's at this point I need to take a step back to 1890 and mention Whitworth steel barrels being a huge player in the game. A strong enough barrel to take just about any nitro powder before nitro powders came out or smokeless powders came out proper. The Whitworth fluid press steel barrel is essential to modern gun making and a huge step in the right direction, although we all missed Damascus because it was 10 times prettier. We're going to take a step into my preferred domain now, and we're going to talk about the Boss 1909 Over and Under. The Over and Under that's remained pretty much unchanged ever since, and more importantly, whose design and features have been stolen by many thousands of gun makers over the years. And this is because it is an amazing action, an amazing concept action, low profile, beautiful, timeless, sweet, made by the best gun maker in the world pretty much of all time. Yeah, that definitely deserves a mention. Made in every caliber, a scaled action. Yeah. I'm a huge Boss Over and Under fan. And I'm usually a fan of just about every Boss shotgun derivative too. The action just lends itself to beautiful shapes and stylings, and anyone who even does a half decent job of emulating the original, well, they get my vote. Yeah, there's some other over and unders out there that came up with some great designs around the same time and just after. Woodward in 1913, for example, great, but not as timeless and not as stolen as the Boss. And the last one on my list, and probably the last great shotgun innovation of any real note, again, goes back to Browning. The Browning Superposed, 1931. Yeah, it's a bit vanilla by comparison to the others perhaps, but this was the first mass-produced over and under. It was the father of just about everything we know and love today. The design was made from 12 bore all the way down to 410 in affordable grades all the way to unaffordable. And the design remains relatively unchanged to now. More importantly, a bit like the Boss, everyone has stolen ideas from Browning or been inspired by that Browning idea. Either inspired to take ideas from it or inspired to try and make something better. And there is some other amazing guns out there. The Beretta SO is pretty timeless using that cross-locking bolt, but that was taken from another invention before in Cybersides, and everything is kind of derivatives from something else. There's no truly original ideas. There's some new great ideas and inspired ideas. But since then, there's been very little that stands out as absolutely unique. What will be next? Who knows? We saw that electric shotgun a few years ago. Maybe that would be the thing. But I think up until the point that we move off of shooting nitro-powdered cartridges in the style that we do, well, I don't think we're going to see any huge changes soon. And if we do, well, I'm really looking forward to them. Guys, I hope you enjoyed watching this video as much as I did making it. If you enjoyed it, please like it. Maybe subscribe to the channel, and if you've enjoyed a few of our videos, maybe consider going and becoming a member. So that was that. That is how we got to where we are today. If I missed anything out, make sure you remind me, but more importantly, be excellent to one another. Take care, goodbye, and hopefully the world will be back to normal soon.